If I may get your attention, please. I believe we are ready to start.
I like you.
Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
All right. I don't need to yell then. Good afternoon. My name is Esther Harrington, and I'm the Public Service Desk Department Head at the Auburn Area Branch Library. It is my pleasure indeed to welcome you on behalf of the Bay County Library System to today's presentation of Book for Lunch. Before we proceed with it, I would like to invite our audience to help us celebrate National Library Week next week, from April 9 to April 15, by visiting your neighborhood public library and enjoying the many offerings it will provide. From free DVD rentals to replacement of lost or worn out library cards, to waiving the late fees on overdue fines. You will also have the opportunity to enter a drawing for a Kindle Fire HD and $25 gift card at one of our branches. You may get more details about this event as well as many other programs coming up to your library by picking up a free copy of our newsletter, Library Tidings, or by visiting our website, www.baycountylibrary.org. Our guest speaker today, Rick Sigsby, graduated from Midland Public Schools and earned a Bachelor of Science degree from Central Michigan University and a Master of Science degree from University of Michigan. Rick is a retired park ranger, writer, and part-time owner of racehorses. He has a weekly newspaper column called Rick Off the Record and is a regular contributor to several nationally circulated horse racing magazines. A lifelong resident of Michigan, Rick lives with his wife Ann and his cat Tommy in Coleman. Rick likes to write, and he self-publishes his material through Dream Builder Publications. His first book, Discovering Hidden Treasures, was published in 2007, and it was followed by Gladwin County in the Images of America series, The Valley of Athletes, Discovering Hidden Treasures Part 2, Living on the Edge, and Michigan's Holy Water, the Great Lakes Wine Bible. Just published in November 2016, Rick's seventh book, Michigan's Holy Hops, the Great Lakes Beer Bible, is a follow-up to Michigan's Holy Water, and it is the subject of today's presentation. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in giving a warm welcome to our guest speaker, Rick Sigsby. I'm going this way, this table's over there.
We were counting up, and this is the fourth time that I've done Book for the Lunch here in Bay City. The first couple times we had a lot of snow on the ground. We thought it was going to be snowing again today, but actually the weatherman did kind of cooperate. But I also understand that not too far away from here, the winds put out the power for maybe a few more people that would have attended, but the library had to close yesterday early because no power, and now today we have power, so good things rolling this way. Again, thank you, Esther, for that very nice introduction. A lot of people asked me, how did you get into writing? And the reality is, I'm not sure when it really actually began, but somewhere in the adult years, I got into the horse business and was asked to write a few articles that perpetuated from there into a newspaper column, which perpetuated into writing books. So it was a cumulative effort that my wife has graciously allowed me to do. So she happens to be my editor also. So not only am I married to her, but she's my editor, so she always gets the last word. Also, my webmaster, Phil Paulus, is here, who takes care of my very excellent website, which I think we both are very proud of. And it does help move the books along. So the presentation today is on Michigan Holy Hops, the Great Lakes Beer Bible, That was a follow-up to the very successful wine book, Michigan's Holy Water, the Great Lakes Wine Bible. And I figured if there was a wine Bible out there, we should have a beer Bible. And the follow-up to the beer Bible is going to be Michigan's Holy Spirits, the Great Lakes Distillery Bible, which is now going crazy here in Michigan with a lot of distilleries opening up. So I tell everybody I'm not a wine expert, I'm not a beer expert, and I certainly am not a spirits expert, but I'm, I guess, an alcohol enthusiast, if you want to put a title to it. Let's see if the technology works. There's the two books that are in the series. I told my wife that after the spirits book, I probably would be a full-blown alcoholic and she could drag me out to the old folks' home, but she wants me to finish the series for a nice 4-book Christmas box set with Michigan's Holy Grounds about coffee houses, so she expects me to sober up. This is how it all kind of started. Phil and Sandy and I belong to a wine club here in Bay City that, as you can see, is very successful. We were sitting around contemplating life and trying to solve the world's problems with our glasses of wine and talking about the Michigan wine industry and how it was not very well represented at Wine Club. And we were wondering why, because we assumed, correctly so, that the wine industry was doing very well. And Phil just happened to mention, that sounds like the subject of your next book. And I said, I'm not a wine expert, and I don't have the time, the energy, or the money to become one. And he said, none of us are wine experts, but we need somebody out there asking the right questions. So that's how the wine book started. And from there, we gravitated to beer because most of you are aware that we can't keep up with how many beer pubs, breweries are out there because they're opening so fast. I would estimate that the last Michigan beer guide that I got, which was the the January-February issue, the March-April issue probably is going to be out within a week, but they had somewhere around 290 breweries and brew pubs listed. So it's continuing to grow, and I don't know, there's definitely room for volume 2 out there, I'm sure of that, because I certainly didn't include all of the breweries and brew pubs out there. But we are talking about beer. It is the oldest alcoholic beverage out there. It's the 3rd most popular drink to, what's the top 2? Guesses? Water is number 1.
Coffee. Coffee, yeah.
Not coffee. Tea. Yes, tea. Now you're going to get an argument from the coffee people. You're going to get an argument from the soft drink people. They all want to try to get in there. But so far they have not been able to defeat water, tea, and beer as far as the top 3 are concerned. Beer is kind of basic ingredients of water, malt, hops, and yeast. I say it's not rocket science, but there certainly is a little bit of science when it comes to making beer, especially good tasting beer. It is interesting to look into the history of beer and try to pinpoint exactly when it was created. There are actually historians out there that truly believe that beer is what cultivated our society. That, in fact, it's one of the pillars of civilization. Now, you may think that that's kind of a stretch, and this really isn't how it all started. But, although I really like that picture. If you go back to early civilization, Mesopotamia, there are hieroglyphics, when they did start with the written word, there are beer recipes. So, beer has been around a long, long time. Beer was a very important part of the Egyptian culture as well. And no, I don't think they've found any of those particular drawings on the pyramids, but the one interesting thing is in society when beer was a very important part of culture. The brewmasters were women. They were the ones that made the beer. Now that transitioned as soon as they found out a way that they could tax it and make money from it, and then immediately it became the men that were the master brewers. But women played a very, very important role in the popularity of beer, so to speak. Okay, the oldest brewery in America? I heard it. Yingling, yes. Unfortunately, for those that are beer connoisseurs, Yingling isn't in Michigan yet. I think it's the great-grandson now of the original Yingling that started expanding it. It was at one time in 11 or 12 states on the East Coast, and it stayed that way for about 100 years. And then they added 1 or 2 states along the way. But here in the last 4 or 5 years, they've expanded. I think they're now into 19 or 20 states. You can go to Toledo, because it is in Ohio. So if you have a craving for Yingling, you either have to have somebody bring it in or go to Toledo. But in fact, it is Yingling. They started in 1829 in Pottsville, Pennsylvania, which is just outside of Philadelphia. Eventually, beer caught on all over the place. And there is an era in the beer revolution called the beer barons era, where beer became very popular. A few people got filthy rich from selling a lot of beer. One was Frederick Pabst, Joseph Smith, and Enhard Anheuser, and Adolphus Busch, excuse me. Interestingly enough, there seemed to be an awful lot of intermarriage going on, and that's how beer barons were created by one popular beer son and or daughter marrying another popular beer that became a mega beer. But and again, as far as Anheuser-Busch is concerned, Adolphus Busch married Enhard's daughter. But he also brought a recipe from Bavaria for a light Pilsner that ended up being called Budweiser, which became a very, very popular beer for Anheuser-Busch. But at any one time, these people, Pabst was the first that was the largest beer producing company in North America, probably the world. Then Schlitz became even more popular and was #1. And finally, Budweiser, Anheuser-Busch, which is now AB InBev, a Belgian company that is a mega company when it comes to beverages. Closer to home, Fabiano Brothers is a major distributor of Budweiser products, Anheuser-Busch products. And Don and I were talking about how they grew to be so big. And basically it was foreseeing the future in people liking beer being cold. And Budweiser was shipped all over the country in refrigerated train cars. First they started with ice, and then when the refrigeration process was developed, they refrigerated railroad cars and started shipping Budweiser all over the country. Who is this man? Unless you're somewhat of a beer person like me, you probably wouldn't recognize who that is. But do you recognize this? Yeah. He started the Stroh's Brewing Company in Detroit in 1850. A long tradition of brewing beer from Germany, and it was fire-brewed beer. Do you remember that phrase? Bohemian-styled fire-brewed beer. Any idea what that means? Fire-brewed beer? Yeah.
Could it be like roasting the hops or something?
Actually, most beer is heated with steam, but they actually put a fire under the kettle, starting out with actually wood burning stoves and eventually went to gas burning. But an open flame to heat the kettle. According to them, the higher temperatures bring out the flavor in beer. I don't know if that's necessarily true, but certainly one of the major breweries here right in Michigan. Anybody recognize these beers? Global was a major beer down in Detroit, eventually bought out, believe it or not, by Stroh's, who was right across the street. Their breweries were literally on the same street. And now, Atwater Brewery is right there, right where Stroh's was and Stroh's headquarters, right in downtown Detroit. Pfeiffer Beer was another big beer. At one time, Pfeiffer Beer was the biggest selling beer in Detroit. And Auto City Beer. That was one of the beers that the thing called Prohibition, which you may have heard of, kind of put them out of business in the 1930s. Frankenmuth has traditionally always had at least 2 breweries. The Geyer Brewing Company has been around since the 1860s. What put them out of business was a tornado, and some of you may have remembered when the Frankenmuth Brewery was destroyed by a tornado. The other Frankenmuth Brewery was across the river, which eventually was bought out by Carling's. Probably a lot of you remember when the Carling's Brewing Company was there in Frankenmuth, and then they were bought by Heilman. And the Heilman Brewery was there for many years. It finally was bought out by Tiny Zender, and they started the little shops across the river and eventually tore that down. How many of you remember the Pheasant in Sigsby? Yeah, they were a brewery that was actually around until the 60s, but a pretty popular beer here in mid-Michigan. I'm assuming that none of you were around when the Phoenix Brewing Company was here in Bay City, but they actually were started from the ashes, literally, of another brewing company called the West Bay City Brewing Company. They caught on fire, burned down, and guys came in, bought the remnants of their equipment, and started the Phoenix Brewing Company. If you catch on to the correlation there of a bird reappearing from the ashes, you understand the word Phoenix. I think that they were located, well, I wrote it down, wait a minute. I want to get this right. On the corner of Main and Arbor, which I believe is by Betts Park, just south of Betts Park. Yeah, okay. Okay, good. Yeah. They lasted until 1951 before they finally were bought out and put out of business. The Bay City Brewing Company, 22nd and Water Street was where their brewery was. Now, this is something that I think all true beer lovers appreciate. On their label, it said, "Pure and without drugs or poison." Wasn't that nice? That they would actually advertise that there are no drugs or poison in our beer. I think that's better. Another brewery was called the Kalb Brothers Brewery. It started out as the Salzburg Brewery. Back in the 1860s, one of the investors was a man named George Kalb, who eventually changed the name. I think probably it was his grandsons at that point to the Kalb Brewery Company. But Crystal Export was probably their most popular beer. And one of the things that put them on the map was this lady right here. Anyone know who that is? And she was famous for being the first to survive going over Niagara Falls in a barrel that happened to be made by the Coopers at Cal Brewing Company in Bay City, Michigan. Okay, now we move on to something called craft beer. Most of the beer drinkers probably in this room grew up with 8 or 10 beers that pretty much all tasted the same. They were all the Budweisers and the Pabst and the Schlitz and the Strohs and several others. But that was the result of a major beer war that started in the 50s. And at one time, there were over 200 breweries, believe it or not, here in Michigan. Every little town had their own brewery. And there were a lot of regional breweries. But the big boys came in and slowly but surely started buying them out until eventually there were only about 8 or 10 major breweries left in the United States. And they all pretty much made the same kind of beer. You had to go to something like Bacchus or Guinness to get a beer that really had a different taste. And we were discussing earlier about how in my college days, you could not get Olympia and you could not get Coors in Michigan because they were not allowed to sell east of the Mississippi. So it was a highly prized beer if you were able to score a 6-pack of Coors or Olympia beer. But it really kind of tasted the same as Stroh's and Budweiser and Pabst. It just was not available to us, so it had a different taste entirely, for sure. But craft beer is a beer that's made from a small, independent, traditional brewer. It's defined as a craft brewery by producing less than 6 million barrels a year. So technically, Sam Adams is still a craft brewery, although I think their last count is somewhere around 5.6 million barrels of beer that they produce in over 60 different brands. But also the United States is the second beer producing country in the world, second to
Germany?
You'd think Germany.
Yeah.
Not even close. Any other guesses?
Ireland.
China.
Oh, yeah.
It doesn't take a lot of Chinamen to surpass us as far as beer is concerned. There's a lot more out there. But craft beer consists of about 13% of the market. Michigan is 6th in the number of breweries. As I said, now we're rapidly approaching 300 breweries here in Michigan. Bell's is currently number 12 as far as total production is concerned. They're actually number 6 when you're comparing them to just craft breweries, but they are 12th in the nation overall. And Founders in Grand Rapids is number 20. The difference being Bell's is 100% family owned. Founders has sold 30% of their brewery to the largest beer producer in Spain. So they have an international market out there. And beer sales are predicted to be in the vicinity of $700 billion by the year 2020. That's a lot of beer. Who's this man? Larry Bell. Very good. Very good. He started the Kalamazoo Brewing Company in 1985. Ironically, that was the same year that Stroh's Brewery closed in Detroit. So the year that our largest brewery in the state closed was the year the very first craft brewery in Michigan opened, Kalamazoo Brewing Company. And that was what Larry brewed his beer in, a 15-gallon soup kettle. And how many have ever heard of Huber beer? Someone actually has heard of Huber beer? Yes? It was about the cheapest beer you could buy in the 1980s, and I believe a case was $4. So you can imagine the quality of beer. But Larry could not procure a bottling contract. So every weekend, he drove to Wisconsin and bought as many cases of Huber beer that he could stick in his station wagon, only to return to Kalamazoo, have his 10 employees drink as much of the Huber beer as they could stand, take the labels off, and put Kalamazoo Brewing Company labels on. And now they're the 12th largest brewery in the United States.
Did the health department have a problem with that?
As far as I know, and this has never been documented, but Larry gave Huber beer to the inspectors too. But there were many times when he wanted to go out the back door when somebody was knocking on the front door. But, and actually that's a story that's in the book that he did tell me, because he was very afraid of getting shut down when he was Crazy Larry selling beer in a box down at the railroad tracks. But just recently they rebranded, a very subtle difference. But one of the reasons why was because they thought their original logo of Bell's Brewery kind of looked like hats. So they made them more Bell-like. Two Hearts is still their most popular beer. It's one of the largest selling ales in the United States. Hop Slam has been a huge success for them with the huge growth of IPAs. IPA stands for India Pale Ale, which obviously means it came from India originally, right? No. And there's a vicious rumor going around that it was created, they popped it up so that they could get the beer to the British soldiers in India, which is bunk. It was just a big advertising campaign. Because English Pale Ale has been around for centuries, but they gave it a nice fancy name and called it IPA. One of their latest creations is something called Oatsmobile, which I like it. How many have ever been to the Eccentric Cafe in Kalamazoo, which was the original brewery? Now they're out a little further east and have a huge production facility. How many have ever had an Oberon? Okay. How many have ever had a Soul Sun, which is Oberon with a different name? It started out as Soul Sun, and it was going to be a huge seller, right up until 5 Mexicans showed up in very fancy suits and a lot of jewelry and a big limousine, and told Larry that he could not sell his beer as Soul Sun because they were the lawyers for the Sol Brewing Company in Mexico and had the sole rights to the name Sol. And Larry stomped his feet and screamed and yelled and said they can't stop him from selling his beer in Michigan. And then his lawyer pointed out that they had about 100 times more money than he did. So changed the name. So he negotiated with the Sol Brewing Company and basically kept the label and changed the name to Oberon. And now in semi-retirement, he has created his Mad Lab up in the UP. It's called Upper Hand Brewery in Escanaba, Michigan. And he spends about 20% of his time in Kalamazoo with the brewery. The rest of the time is probably split equally between the Upper Peninsula and his luxury box at Wrigley Stadium because he's an enormous Cubs fan. Few myths and mysteries about beer. Beer should be served ice cold or in a frosted mug. True or false? False. Basically what you're going to get is watered down beer. Beer tastes better in a bottle rather than a can. Obviously that's personal preference, but the reality is they have done extensive blind tasting tests and there really is no difference. So probably if you think it's better in a bottle, it's mostly psychological, but convince yourself that it's true. The color of the bottle affects the shelf life of beer. True. Why? Because of light coming in. That's why most beer is in a brown bottle. Less light gets through, and that's what spoils the beer. Guinness Stout has more calories and alcohol than Bud Light. True or false? That's kind of a trick question. Because actually, Guinness Stout has more calories, 15 more calories than Bud Light, but they have the same alcohol content, 4.2
Calories in that there.
Yeah. And if you can discern 15 calories, good luck. Light beer comes from the top half of the brewing kettle. Believe it or not, there's people out there that think that, okay? But light beer is light beer, and it takes the whole kettle, trust me. Bock beer is brewed each spring after the tanks have been cleaned. I don't know who started that. Actually, I speculate because I did read about this, and it was a company in Germany that was jealous because the town next to them made better Bock beer than they did. So they started the rumor that they scraped their tanks and made their Bock beer from that. But the fact is, no, that's not true. Dark beer is heavier and gets you drunk faster. True? This is, I don't know how this myth started, but for whatever reason, there are a lot of people out there that think dark beer is heavy and it must have a lot of alcohol. When in fact, an overwhelming majority of the dark beer out there is just exactly the opposite. It's a very light beer, very low in alcohol, and it has coffee notes and chocolate notes, and it tastes wonderful. And why people think all dark beer is like bitter, I don't know where they get that. But if you haven't tried, try Atwater Vanilla Porter. Ooh, that's good. Good. Beer makes you fat.
That's what I talk about the drinking beer that makes you fat.
Drinking too much beer, not eating good, and exercising less, that makes you fat. Prior to 1993, there was a brewery license. That was it. Stroh's, Frankenmuth, and Kalamazoo Brewing Company, which eventually became Bell's Brewing Company, were the only 3 licensed breweries in Michigan. Then they created 2 new licenses, a microbrewery license and a brew pub license. There's a lot of nuances between the 2 microbreweries and brew pubs. The basic difference is a brew pub is a restaurant that makes beer. A microbrewery is a brewery that makes beer that serves food. Okay? The biggest difference is there's an intermingling in a brew pub. You know, there's beer being made all around. Okay? But in a microbrewery, it has to be not necessarily separate facilities. It can be a wall. Usually it's a glass wall so you get to see them making the beer behind the bar. And there are a few other subtle differences. Microbreweries, you're allowed to brew up to 60,000 barrels of beer annually, and a brew pub is 18,000 barrels of beer annually. Ann Arbor Brewing Company is a microbrewery, but they also are a fantastic restaurant. So it's a good example of, is this really a microbrewery or a brew pub? They have on their label, it says microbrewery. Dark Horse, how many have been to Dark Horse before? Marshall, Michigan. Man, they make good beer down there. Wow. You may have seen their TV show on the History Channel, Dark Horse Nation. One season, they were glad to jettison that. Yeah, fascinating, good place. Founders, like I said, if you haven't been to Founders Go, they took up one whole block of Grand Rapids, Michigan, and then they ran out of space, so they bought another old warehouse about a mile south of there. That's going to be their experimental brewery. So growing leaps and bounds. One of the bigger breweries here in Michigan, and I think somewhere in the excess of 40 states now they're in. So they're expanding all the time. New Holland Brewing Company in Holland, Michigan. I asked the owner, why on God's earth would you put a brewery in Holland, Michigan, which is like the bedrock of the Dutch Reformed religion? And he said, oh, there's a lot of basement beer drinkers in Holland, Michigan. It started by two college kids from Midland, Michigan. The one partner sold out and has brewery Vivant, which is a microbrewery in Grand Rapids, Michigan. Shorts, one quick story about Joe Short. Bel Air, Michigan. Who has been to Bel Air, Michigan? You have to be going there because it is on the way to nowhere. Okay? So you have to be going to Bel Air, Michigan. But they were struggling in the early years, making good beer, but trying to get people to Bel Air to drink it was a whole different experience. But they got to the point where he knew he was going to have to build a production facility. Had no clue of how he was going to pay for it. But they outgrew their space. He was behind the bar, contemplating paying the bills. When a gentleman walked in, sat down, tried one of the beers, and told him, I really like your beer. I want to join the Mug Club. And Joe kind of ignored it. And finally the guy said, look, I really like your beer. How much is it going to cost me to join the Mug Club? And Joe's thinking, well, I make probably about $25 a year on somebody that joins the Mug Club. And I've got to, build this production facility. So he turned around and he said to the gentleman, if you want to join the Mug Club, it's going to cost you $125,000. And the guy said, well, I think you need more like $250,000. And he wrote out a check and became a silent partner of Short's Brewing Company. Miracles do happen, folks. Tri-City Brewery. Who has been to Tri-City Brewery? They have a gorgeous new facility. I don't even know the name of the street. Bill, what's the name of the street? It's in an industrial park off of Wilder and Euclid, right in that area there. Really beautiful, nice facility. If you've not been to the Midland Brewing Company, they shut down for a little while, got a new owner, and put like $2 million into the place. It is gorgeous. The people that run the Boathouse restaurant in Traverse City are managing the kitchen, great food. Hopefully their beer will get as good as the food. But a gorgeous facility. Mountain Town, good beer, great food. Another really, really nice place. This is what an author looks like when he's researching a book. The middle picture is what an author looks like when he pushes send and sends it off to the printer. And that's what an author looks like when he gets the book back and it's nice looking. A couple things about beer specifically. It's growing leaps and bounds. I always tell people if they have the beer book, take it with them. You never know when you're going to come across a brew pub or a brewery here in Michigan. We're getting back to that era when any town of any size has their own local brewery. And I would strongly urge you to support your local brewery. They're doing a great job and they're making good beer. And there's a lot of good beer out there. Don't be afraid to try new stuff. It's changed dramatically. It's not that same stuff that we grew up with that was, you know, kind of that light lager taste. Your taste buds will explode. And don't be hoodwinked into thinking when you look at that 80 beers list when they hand it to you when you go into a tap room, that pale ale is going to taste like Bud Light. It doesn't, trust me. Okay? Wine, again, the wine book, if you go in there and, especially if it's off-season, you don't have to stand in line and battle the tour buses up in Traverse City, there's a good chance you're probably going to talk to the winemaker or the winery owner. And if you're willing to try their products, they'll talk to you for an hour. Same thing with the breweries and the brew pubs. If you're interested in drinking their product, they're more than willing to share what's going on because they want to educate you. And that's the difference with beer and wine. 20 years ago, in the wine world, most people would go into a nice restaurant and the wine steward would basically steer them in the right direction of what wine to drink with a good pairing with whatever they wanted from the menu. Now people are much more educated. They understand that they're allowed to ask questions and know about the kind of wine that they're pairing with their food. In the beer world, people are confused like people in the wine world were 20 years ago. Now you go into a tap room and they hand you a list of 60 or 80 or 100 different beers that they have available. So most people will buy a flight and kind of experiment and try these different beers. Again, a lot of people thinking, oh, pale ale, that probably tastes like Bud Light. Or getting, you know, a dark beer and thinking that it's going to taste like Guinness. There's a lot of different varieties, a lot of different styles of beer out there. And China may be number one, and you may think Germany has all the good brewmasters out there, but the bottom line is, in the beer world, the two major competitions are the Beer Cup, which happens every 2 years internationally, and the Great Beer Festival in Colorado, which has all of the major world-class brewers submitting their samples. And Michigan brewers are winning gold medals left and right. And there are a lot of upstart breweries that are coming to Michigan to try to pilfer the brewers that are available here, because there's a lot of breweries that have world-class brewmasters right here in Michigan. We've built a reputation now of creating wonderful beers with wonderful beer makers. So, and that's why Bell's is now started a brewery in Texas. Founders is now in 40 plus states. They're starting to expand. And the beer world, as far as Michigan is concerned, is getting bigger and bigger all the time. So, questions? Yes?
Yeah, we've been to the Jolly Pumpkin in Detroit and Ann Arbor, and we understand they're coming here to Bay City. Any background on that?
The brewmaster's name is Ron Jeffries, and he is, well, I wouldn't say it's undisputed, but as far as knowledgeable beer people are concerned, he is the #1 brewer of sour beers. Okay? Now, sour beers. There are a lot of different ones out there. There are a lot of good ones out there. I'm not a big fan of sour beers. There's just too many others out there that I really like. That's not to say that I won't eventually find one, because again, he's experimenting. He is the #1 guy out there. Jolly Pumpkin is a great brewery, and they serve great food.
We agree.
Yeah. If you've been to any of them, a wonderful beer selection. Also, their food is fantastic. They are in partnership with another brewery called North Peak, which is in Traverse City. More beers that you know, the pale ales and the lagers and things that you would
That's what
recognize.
we have.
Yeah.
I don't like the sour either.
Yeah, but I don't want to mislead you and think that Jolly Pumpkin here in Bay City is just going to serve sour beers. They'll be serving all of North Peak's selection too. There'll be a lot of different beer selections. And Ron doesn't just, that's his passion is sour beers. So it's not just sour beers that Jolly Pumpkin brews, but that's what they're doing it for. That's what they're really
Any
doing.
idea when they're gonna come in? I don't see any progress on that transition.
You know, it's got to do with the liquor license transfer.
Okay.
If you know anything about Jolly Pumpkin and the whole organization down there, which is Mission 86, I think is the name of the parent company, the two guys that own the company are very passionate about keeping the buildings traditional, not doing a lot of change to it, but if you've been to their places like Jolly Pumpkin, they're all unique, they're all a little bit different, and they went from the day it opens, it'll be great. There's no transition period, there's no, well, give them a few months. No, they don't open their doors until they're ready to go, and it'll be great stuff from day one. So I would guess within the year, but whether it's June or September, I don't know.
Do they have a location?
The old Steinhaus is where they're.
Atrium.
And the Atrium, yes,
I mean,
yes.
They bought both places. We understand they're gonna try to keep the Steinhaus as the theme as it is. I don't know
Okay,
if that will happen.
yeah, which I think would be smart.
They got 400 and some steins in the ceiling that they bought, so
Yeah,
I think
yeah.
they're. Well,
I think that would
we
be
don't know
smart
that.
if they did that. Yeah, but it's also world-class food that they go.
Yeah, absolutely. We concur.
People are
Yeah.
real lucky to have them. They're a first-class operation.
Do you think the microbreweries are just a trend? I mean, you go 3-4 years and you get all these microbreweries, and then the trend goes down. They all can't be tremendous.
Budweiser sure hopes it's just a trend.
Other than that, what do you?
No. The simple answer to your question is no. They already have 13% of the market. They're projecting that they'll have as much as 20% of the market within the next decade. So it's not going away.
If they all can't be good,
Well, then they aren't. Truthfully, they all aren't. And there'll be a shakedown eventually. I always tell people right now, if you're starting a brewery, the worst thing you could possibly do is start a microbrewery and want to distribute your beer. Because, perfect example, go to Myers. How much space is left
Yeah.
for beer? So you have to compete against somebody that already has an established market. All right? Very little space out there. So you take your beer to a tap room and you say, I've got an IPA here, just won a gold medal at the World Cup. This is a gold medal World Cup IPA. We want to put it in your tap room. And the owner of the tap room says, which of the 13 gold medal winning IPAs do you want me to take down? So it's a tough road. It's a tough market out there. The ones that will succeed right off the bat are the ones that make good beer. Okay? First and foremost, you have to make good beer. Okay? Second, you have to cater to your clientele. You have to treat your customers right. If you don't have good customer service, you're not going to make it. You can have great beer and lose. Just like in a restaurant, you can have great food, but if you don't have the service, you're not going to make it. Same thing in the beer world. I truly think that the ones that will survive are the mom and pop operations that, they may less than 5,000 barrels a year, but they make fantastic beer and they cater to their local clientele. A place like Tri-City is a perfect example. They've got corner in the market because they've got several good beers that they're already distributing. So that is a big leg up for them. Okay. But to answer your question, it's gonna take good beer first, service second, to survive. And there will be a shakeout, because they, but they're projecting for it to continue to grow. Yes?
This is a little off topic, but you might know.
Oh, I'm excellent at off-topic subjects.
Well, if you don't, just make it up.
Shit, that's right.
Is it true that Guinness is still served upon request in Irish maternity wards, the new moms?
Not being a mother, I really honestly don't know.
I know that was true 20 years ago still.
It wouldn't surprise me.
The thought was it's good for them and good for their babies.
That wouldn't surprise me either. What does surprise me is a company like Guinness trying to convince people that their American Blonde is a craft beer.
Yeah. Plus, they're trying to get people to drink it ice cold.
Yes, yeah. Ice cold beer freezes your taste buds. End of discussion. Yeah, plus it waters it down too. That's the way it is. I have a Christmas special. Now you may find that hard to believe. It's in April, but I started in Christmas with the beer book. It's $20, and you get a nice pint shell with it, with the name of the book on it. And according to my editor/wife, my autograph is priceless. If you're interested in the beer book and would like the wine book too, you get the wine book half off. You still get my autograph, and you get a tasting glass with the wine book too. So for $30 you get both of them, and I'll be glad to sign it to whoever you want me to sign it to. Now the catch is, when I do book signings, I always ask, would you like me to sign it? And the answer is usually yes. And then my next question is, who do you want me to be? That throws them a little bit. But thank you. It's been a pleasure.